Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be my loops masterclass. I did do an iteration masterclass, which I highly recommend you watch. In that video, basically what I focused on is just how to loop over like arrays and objects in different ways. This is just going to be purely sort of loops, because there's a couple loops I haven't really, or loops and conditionals I haven't really talked about in previous videos all that much. So I wanted to talk about that here. But first we'll start with the basics, which is a while loop. Okay, so a while loop is pretty straightforward. Basically, while whatever's in the parentheses is true, do this block of code. So what I'm going to do is say we're going to create a variable called x. Let x equal 0. And if while x is less than 5, we're going to just console.log x. Okay, console.log x. So save. Now when I do that, it's going to basically first time x is 0, so 0 is less than 5. That's true. So it does console.log. And it's going to console.log 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. But when it's 5, 5 is not less than 5, so it'll just break the loop. So let's run that code. Node testing.js. And oh, oops, I broke it. So wait, Control C. I broke the code. So basically what I did is I just created an infinite loop. The reason I did that is because x stays at 0 because I never actually increased the value of x. So right now I'm waiting for it to exceed the call stack or listen to my, actually I think I can just close this out probably. I'd rather listen to my directions, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So let's close that out, open up a new terminal. So let's fix that. How would I fix that? X++. So that way each time at the end of the loop x goes up by 1. That was my problem. So it stayed 0, so the loop just kept running forever. And that's not good, because then your computer's like confused. See, now when I do that, x gets increased by 1 at the end of each round. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice. So that's one way to do the while loop. There's also what's called a do a while loop. So basically the difference would be this. Cut. So what this means is that whatever this first part is always going to happen at least once. Okay? So this is generally a situation, because what if the situation isn't true from the get-go? Like what if x is already over 5, but you'd still like the loop to run at least once? Then you do a do while loop. It'll do this first, regardless of whether this situation is true or not, because it doesn't check whether it's true till after. Okay, till after it's running for the first time. So it always checks it at the end, not at the beginning. That's the only big difference. So now if I change this to 6, it still will run the loop code once. See, and I get 6. So that's a do while loop. That's another thing you can do. Another type of loop is the for loop. And in the for loop, what you can do is that you just do everything inside the parentheses. So instead of me declaring a separate variable, I can just declare it in here. Typically you use I, it's your first one. So I equals 0, then it's your expression, so long as I is less than 5. And then we say, hey, at the end of each loop, you're going to do this. I plus you're going to increment I. And I'll just do the same thing. I'm going to console.log the value of I each go around. So in this case, I built all that same logic from before here. So instead of having that declaration before the while loop, I just put it there. Instead of having to have that increment at the end of the loop's block of code, I just put it there. It's the same thing, just a lot tidier. Cool. Okay, now what if I only wanted to console log when it's even? So we can put a conditional in there. So we can say if I modulo 2 equals 0, which means it's even, then console.log I, else I want to continue. And what continue means is just go on to the next loop. So it'll stop. So let's say I were to put another code down, a line of code down here, console.log, it's even. Now let's make that a string. Let's think through what would happen here. So first I'm going to check if it's even. And if it is, it'll console log I, so it'll give us the number on the screen. The else won't run, so then it'll also console log it's even. But if it's not even, it'll run the else statement, which just says continue, and we'll just go on to the very next loop. It'll just basically increment it and go on to the next one. So let's see what happens. So in that case, what I would expect would happen is 0 is not, well, 0 will end up evaluating as an even number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start I at 1, just to avoid that, because that's just always confusing. 1's odd, so it's not going to print. 2 is even, so it should print. 3 is odd, so it shouldn't print. 4 is even, so it should print. 5 is not going to run at all. So we should just see 2 and 4, and it's even between each. Yep, and that's what we see. Because again, when it hits 3, it runs the else and just continues on to the next line. So even though it's even, it's not part of the condition, it's not part of the if statement, it never gets there. Because when it hits this continue, it just moves on to the next loop and skips the rest of the code. Okay? Now if I use break, break just breaks the loop and ends the loop right there. So whenever we hit the break statement, it'll end the loop. So basically the first number, so let's start with 2, just to kind of illustrate this. 2 is an even number, so it should print 2. It'll get to 3, it'll break, and go no further. The loop will just stop there. So in this case, we'll only see 2. It's even. Because once it hits 3, it just breaks the loop. Okay? So that's the difference between continue and break. Okay? Now, the thing is that you might start doing loops and loops inside loops inside loops. And at some point, you may want to break or continue the loop, not the loop that you're in, but the loop above the loop. So this is where you start doing labels. So I might start doing something like this. Loop 1. Okay, and that basically labels this as loop 1. So whenever I use a statement, well, you'll see in a second. So then I do another for loop for, let's say, for x equals I. Okay. And if I is less than 10, I plus plus. Okay. And there's a code for that, but actually I want to make another label for this loop. So this is, we're going to call it loop 2. Okay, and you'll see why I want that. So essentially what's happening is that for each loop of this parent loop, it's going to do this loop. And this loop starts at whatever I is, and will basically count to 10. And I want to basically console, we'll just do that whole conditional again. So if x modulo 2, ooh, this could be a problem. Let me make sure that this is x, because I'm using x for that loop. That's always an issue when you start doing nested loops and loops. You start using the wrong variable name within the wrong loops. So x modulo 2 equals 0. So if it's even, console.log x. So console log all the even numbers in each loop. Else, else if x is greater than 5, so then we're doing an else if statement. So if it's greater than 5, so it's not even, but it's greater than 5, then we're going to continue, but not to the next loop of this loop. We want to continue to the next iteration of loop 1. So we're going to do continue loop 1. So in that case, it's going to then just break this loop altogether, increment I, and just go on to the next round of loop 1. Okay. And just to kind of illustrate that, in case this loop ever does fully complete itself without ever hitting that continue, which it shouldn't, there's a possibility that at the very end of the parent loop we say cheese, I should not exist, because technically this line should never run, because technically it should always hit this continue before. Once it's doing this loop will always eventually hit this continue. So that means this line of code will never run. So let's take a look at our result. Okay, and that's basically what it does. So it's basically printing the even numbers up until it gets to 7. Once it hits 7, it's hitting it hits this continue, which then goes on to the next loop. So it never finishes. Neither loop really like truly finishes. And we just end up with these two console logs. So the point is, using the label, I'm able to actually trigger a continue from a parent loop from within the child loop. Because usually it gets really confusing, because when you use continue and break without a label, it'll always just break or continue the loop that you're currently inside of. But sometimes you actually want to just start over the parent loop for whatever reason. So that's how you would do it. You'd have to put in labels and then use those labels to continue and break. So that's sort of very fancy looping. Cool. I mean, that's pretty much like some of the more advanced like looping stuff. Trying to think if there's anything else that's fairly valuable. Again, you can put anything in here as an expression as far as evaluating what's true or false. So it's just more of a discussion of booleans. But yeah, the main thing here was kind of to add in that do while loop and those labels, which I haven't discussed in previous videos. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.